Part 2. Confucianism and its critiques. Legalism, Mohism, and Daoism. Imagine a world where philosophers weren't just debating in ivory towers, but actively fighting to shape the fate of nations. This was China from 770 to 220 BCE, a tumultuous period when the old dynasty was fractured into hundreds of states, locked in constant warfare with the ultimate goal of unifying the land. But this struggle wasn't just about military might. It was a battle for the very soul of China, where almost all Chinese philosophical thought was forged. Scholars weren't merely pondering abstract concepts. They were crafting blueprints for social reform and the ideal government. At the heart of this intellectual melee stood four major schools of thought. Confucianism, the heavyweight champion, emphasizing social harmony through rulers exemplifying virtue. Legalism, the short-lived philosophy that advocated rule by law, arguing rulers should be hidden rather than being moral exemplars, in contrast to Confucianism. Mohism, a revolutionary, utilitarian philosophy promoting egalitarianism and welfare of the people, based on impartial love, critiquing Confucian favoritism. Daoism, the mystical outsider whose profound wisdom often made the other schools appear as foolish young idealists. As we explore these schools of thought, remember, we're witnessing the intellectual birth of one of history's greatest civilizations, forged in the fires of the 100 schools of thought. This was the moment when China's philosophical DNA was written, shaping not just a nation, but an entire cultural sphere that would influence all of East Asia. Confucianism, legitimacy as virtuous ruling. A political system inherently divides its people into two classes, those who rule and those who are ruled. Even in a democracy, the majority effectively rules over the minority. For a political system to run smoothly, it must be based on the foundation that the ruling class has the right to command, and that the ruled class has a duty to obey. This duty isn't just any obligation. It's often far more stringent than any other, with disobedience potentially resulting in imprisonment or even death. Anarchists seek to dismantle this very foundation. Without proper justification, political authority, enforced by police and military, becomes indistinguishable from the power wielded by highway bandits. Therefore, the task of justifying this power becomes one of the most critical challenges in political philosophy. It's a high-stakes intellectual battle where the very essence of authority and obedience hangs in the balance. Given the tumultuous times in which Confucius lived, where states could rise and fall overnight, the core concern of Confucian philosophy became the legitimacy of political authority. Specifically, it sought to answer the question, where does the power to command others originate? For Confucius, this power was not derived from brute force, hereditary rights, or divine selection. Instead, it stemmed from the mandate of heaven, a sacred trust granted to leaders for the benefit of the people. This mandate was conditional. The right to rule had to be continuously earned through moral conduct and just governance, making it a responsibility rather than an entitlement. If a ruler became corrupt or failed to govern justly, they would lose the mandate of heaven, justifying their replacement. To Confucius, the key condition for maintaining the mandate of heaven was virtue. A ruler's personal moral cultivation was essential. Confucianism asserts that the ultimate purpose of political authority is not merely to maintain order, an order that can be short-lived if people obey out of fear of punishment. Instead, lasting social order and peace are achieved when people believe that governance is moral and internalize this morality. Through moral education and persuasion, rulers can foster social harmony and encourage the cultivation of virtue among the populace. To establish this virtuous society, the ruler must be more moral than anyone else, serving as a moral exemplar. When rulers govern with virtue, they naturally inspire the same in their subjects, creating a ripple effect throughout society ultimately fostering a community rooted in virtue. This approach emphasizes a reciprocal relationship between ruler and ruled, where the ruler's virtuous behavior inspires loyalty and good conduct from the subjects. In turn, the positive response from the populace reinforces the ruler's commitment to virtue. Confucius believed that this cycle of moral influence would lead to a self-regulating society where people do what is right even without external enforcement. By grounding political legitimacy in virtue rather than force or law alone, Confucianism sought to create a form of government that was both effective and morally sound, capable of achieving long-term stability and harmony. Many elements contribute to virtue in Confucian thought. To be truly virtuous, one must first have the knowledge of virtue. Thus, education and wisdom are necessary. However, knowledge alone is not sufficient. One must also have the courage to carry out what is virtuous, even in the face of adversity. This highlights the importance of moral fortitude. Furthermore, to be virtuous, one needs a sense of justice to discern right from wrong and act accordingly. Confucius emphasized that the two most critical virtues for rulers are humanness, or benevolence, and propriety, or proper conduct. Ren, the cornerstone of Confucian philosophy, is a concept as profound as it is elusive. The character itself offers a clue to its meaning. Composed of person and two, it suggests that the essence of being human lies in our relationships with others. Confucius considered Ren the supreme virtue, yet struggled to define it precisely, often resorting to describing it as to love others. This difficulty in pinning down Ren's exact meaning has led to various translations, including benevolence, perfect virtue, goodness, human-heartedness, and humanness. While Ren as a concept is hard to define precisely, it's easier to recognize when it's manifested in action. Confucians believed Ren to be innate in all humans, even those who might seem unlikely to display it. Mencius illustrates this idea through a compelling story about King Yuan of Qi, a ruler known more for his military prowess than his compassion. The tale unfolds at a grand sacrificial ceremony, where King Yuan watches as an ox is led to the altar. Suddenly, the ox begins to tremble in fear. In that moment, something extraordinary happens. The king, typically seen as iron-hearted, feels an unexpected pang of compassion. He orders the ox to be spared and a sheep brought instead. This spontaneous act of mercy, coming from a ruler not known for his gentleness, provides Mencius with a perfect teachable moment. He uses this incident to demonstrate that the capacity for Ren exists within everyone, even a battle-hardened king. Through this simple yet powerful story, Mencius illustrates how Ren, when awakened, can manifest in surprising ways, revealing the innate goodness that Confucians believed resided in all humans. The other key virtue in Confucian philosophy, Li, involves acting appropriately and adhering to rituals and social norms. For rulers, performing rites and rituals was a crucial duty as it expressed and reinforced moral values, ensuring that governance aligned with tradition and ethical conduct. While Li could be viewed as superficial since it mainly involves the appearance of virtue, Confucians argued that it goes much deeper. To illustrate this concept, consider the story of Duke Ling of Wei and his minister Ku Boyu. The Duke was known for his frivolous behavior and neglect of proper rituals. One day, he asked Ku Boyu, "Why do we need all these complicated ceremonies? Isn't it enough to simply rule effectively?" Ku Boyu replied, "Your Highness, imagine a great feast where everyone eats with their hands, grabs food from others' plates, and speaks with their mouths full. The food might be delicious, but would you enjoy the meal? Li is like table manners for governance. It creates harmony, shows respect, and allows everyone to function together smoothly." This example illustrates that Li is not just about outward appearances, but about cultivating inner virtues and expressing them appropriately. It helps rulers and subjects alike navigate complex social relationships, fostering mutual respect and social harmony. By practicing Li, individuals learn to align their inner virtues with their external actions, creating a cohesive ethical framework that guides behavior at both individual and societal levels. Virtue ethics. Given the emphasis on virtue, Confucius's ethics clearly can be called virtue ethics. In Western philosophy, Aristotle also espoused virtue ethics. However, they differed on their focus. Aristotle emphasized personal fulfillment or happiness, while Confucius focused more on social responsibility. In Confucian thought, virtue plays a crucial role in establishing political legitimacy. The possession of virtue was seen as conferring the right to rule upon a king. Indeed, Confucius illustrated ethical behavior through the actions of Junzi, originally referring to princes or nobles. However, ethical conduct is not limited to those of high social standing, but can be cultivated by anyone through study and practice. Anyone could aspire to become a Junzi through ethical conduct and self-cultivation. As a result, Junzi came to mean exemplary moral person. By tying the morality of an action directly to the person who performs it, Confucian ethics fundamentally differs from Western ethical frameworks like Kantian deontology or utilitarianism. These Western ethics evaluate actions independently of the actor. For Kant, actions are right when they fulfill moral duties, and for utilitarians, actions are right if they produce the best outcomes. By contrast, in Confucian thought, the ethical worth of an action is determined by considering who performed it, why they did so, and the circumstances surrounding it. In essence, an action is moral if done by a Junzi. This approach can appear circular, as Junzi's actions are considered inherently moral by virtue of the actor, rather than based on specific moral principles or outcomes. To explain who Junzi is, Confucius contrasts him with Zhao Ren as follows: noble person's wide road, petty person's narrow path. Both words mean road or path, so the two majorly differ in where they walk, figuratively speaking. The Junzi follows a great way, but the Tao also means the path of righteousness, so Junzi follows the right way, representing moral breadth and depth, concern for others and society, long-term principled thinking, and flexibility and wisdom in applying virtues. By contrast, the Zhao Ren treads a narrow path. Zhao Ren, originally meaning commoner, was used by Confucius to describe individuals of low moral character, indicating moral shallowness, self-centeredness driven by self-interest and short-term gains, and rigidity and lack of moral wisdom. Unlike the Junzi who thinks of what is right, the Zhao Ren thinks of what is profitable. By contrasting the Junzi and the Zhao Ren, Confucius provided a clear ethical model for individuals to aspire to. While the distinction between the Junzi's great way and the Zhao Ren's narrow path helps illustrate Confucian morality, it also presents a challenge. How can a petty person overcome their self-interested nature to choose righteousness? This question was addressed by later Confucian thinkers, particularly Mencius and Junzi, who offered contrasting views on human nature and moral development. Mencius argued that human nature is fundamentally good. He believed all humans possess innate moral tendencies, which he called sprouts of virtue. These sprouts include compassion, shame, modesty, and a sense of right and wrong. To illustrate this point, Mencius used the famous example of a child about to fall into a well. Suppose a man were, all of a sudden, to see a young child on the verge of falling into a well. He he would certainly be moved to compassion, not because he wanted to get in the good graces of the parents, nor because he wished to win the praise of his fellow villagers or friends, nor yet because he disliked the cry of the child. For Mencius, moral cultivation involves nurturing these innate tendencies. In contrast, Junzi took a different approach. He argued that human nature is inherently self-interested and potentially destructive. Junzi believed that goodness is achieved through conscious effort and education. He emphasized the importance of ritual, Li, and social norms in shaping moral behavior. To illustrate his point, Junzi used the example of straightening a crooked piece of wood. A piece of wood as straight as a plumb line may be bent into a wheel. Although its bent shape is not its nature, it is what it becomes through artful effort. Thus, when a piece of wood is bent into a wheel, and thereafter is always a wheel, it is because this is the way it was made to be by an artificer. For Junzi, becoming a Junzi requires rigorous education and self-discipline to overcome natural tendencies, as well as conscious effort to align oneself with moral principles and social norms. These contrasting views offer different paths for the Zhao Ren to become Junzi. Mencius's approach encourages nurturing innate moral tendencies through self-reflection and education. Junzi's view emphasizes the need for external guidance and disciplined practice to cultivate virtue. In this way, while both maintained that moral improvement is possible, they differed on the starting point and the methods required. Relational ethics. Confucian ethics begins with the assumption that a person is fundamentally relational, with their identity and moral obligations arising from the network of relationships they inhabit. Social harmony obtains when each person fulfills their roles and responsibilities based on their social position. This relational approach to ethics contrasts sharply with the individualistic perspectives found in Western contract theories from thinkers like Hobbes, Rousseau, Locke, and Rawls, which often conceive of society as a collection of strangers pursuing their rational self-interest. A well-ordered society, according to Confucianism, requires prescribed relationships for each individual, with each person understanding and fulfilling their role within the social fabric, encapsulated in the phrase, "Let the ruler be a ruler and the subject a subject." Confucianism posits 5 cardinal relationships in society: between the king and his ministers or subjects, between father and son, between husband and wife, between elder and younger siblings. Each relationship carries specific duties and expectations that promote mutual respect. For instance, in the relationship between the king and his ministers or subjects, there must be justice, emphasizing the ruler's duty to govern with justice, while subjects reciprocate with loyalty. The father-son relationship emphasizes closeness. Fathers are responsible for providing guidance and support, while sons must show respect and care. The husband-wife relationship stresses distinction in roles, particularly in managing the household. Husbands are seen as providers and decision-makers, while wives manage the household. The relationship between elder and younger siblings is marked by order. Elder siblings are expected to serve as role models, while younger siblings must show deference and respect. Lastly, the relationship between friends is based on trust. This is the only non-hierarchical and equal relationship in Confucianism. For Confucius, this equality in friendship is critical for personal and moral growth, as it allows for open communication between friends. Focusing on moral perfection through friendship, Confucians do not believe in the possibility of genuine friendship among equally morally depraved people. If 2 individuals are morally depraved, their relationship lacks the foundation of trust that is essential to true friendship. Such a relationship would likely be driven by self-interest, manipulation, or other unethical motives, which do not constitute a genuine friendship in Confucian terms. This view is supported by Confucius's famous advice: do not have as a friend anyone who is not as good as you are. It's interesting to note that Confucianism does not include a relationship category for strangers, which contrasts with the Western philosophical assumption that society is made up of strangers. Not knowing anything about a person, what should be the appropriate form of interaction? Did Confucius simply forget to add this relationship? Or did he think that such relationships could be covered by his broader principles of benevolence and propriety? Alternatively, was the exclusion of this relationship purposeful because he believed it to be unknowable? We can find clues to this question in a story from the Analects. One day, Confucius's student, Zhailu, known for his bravery and strong sense of righteousness, saw a man drowning and, without hesitation, jumped into the water to save him. After rescuing the man, Zhailu refused any reward, stating that he acted purely out of moral duty. When Confucius heard about Zhailu's actions, he wasn't sure whether Zhailu had acted morally correctly. On the one hand, he praised Zhailu for his courage and embodiment of Ren, acting with compassion and moral righteousness. However, Confucius also expressed concern. He worried that Zhailu's actions might have been impulsive and could have unnecessarily endangered his life or saved a morally unworthy person. Unsatisfied with this ambivalence, another disciple named Zigong pressed Confucius about the moral duty to save a stranger in a life-threatening situation such as drowning. Confucius replied, "It is not necessary to save him if you do not know him." This response initially suggests that Confucius acknowledges a lack of strict obligation to save someone with whom there is no personal or familial connection. However, he quickly adds, "A man of Ren will act in accordance with what is right." Confucius's response is marked with ambivalence because it balances two competing moral principles: the relational duty, which denies any duty toward strangers, and the universal moral principle of Ren. Regarding the duty to strangers, Confucius's teaching is flexible, allowing for the possibility that in some situations the right action may be to save the stranger, while in others it may not be, as a stranger's moral status is contingent on the specific circumstances. This differs from familial obligations, as illustrated in the example of a son witnessing a crime committed by his father. In this case, the son faces two conflicting duties: to report the crime to the police as required by justice, or to refrain from reporting it as mandated by familial loyalty, arising from the closeness of their relationship and his father's care for him. In this moral conflict, Confucius believed that not reporting the crime was the right course of action. The stringency of duty is based on near and dear relationships. The closer the relationship, the stronger the duty that exists. The complexity of Confucian thought reveals the nuanced nature of moral decision-making, where even actions motivated by the highest virtues are subject to scrutiny and reflection. Confucius's ambivalence underscores the importance of balancing moral ideals with practical wisdom. Unlike the abstract universal principles found in Western ethical theories, Confucian morality is intricately tied to the specific circumstances of each relationship. The context-dependent nature of Confucian morality may appear unsatisfactory to those seeking clear-cut ethical rules. However, this approach reflects the complex reality of moral decision-making and the ongoing journey of moral cultivation. In fact, this complexity resonates with legal philosopher Ronald Dworkin's concept of the Herculean judge. Like Confucian ethics, Dworkin emphasizes that legal principles cannot be understood in isolation, but must be viewed within a broader social and moral context. The Herculean judge, like the Confucian Junzi, must grapple with difficult choices, striving to balance competing principles with integrity and moral wisdom. Legalism. Legalism emerged from Confucian thought, particularly the ideas of Junzi, who believed that human nature is inherently evil and requires strict discipline. However, legalism ultimately rejected the Confucian emphasis on virtuous rulers and moral education, asserting that these were ineffective and irrelevant in politics. Two of the most prominent legalist thinkers, Han Fei and Li Si, were both students of Junzi. Han Fei, especially known for his intellectual talent, graduated at the top of his class. As Han Fei was a prince of the state of Han, he found a counsel and advisor role in Han, while Li Si found employment in the Jin government. The rivalry between Han Fei and Li Si led to a dramatic turn of events. When Jin attacked Han, Han Fei was sent as a diplomatic envoy to Jin. King Zheng of Jin, who would eventually unify China and become Jin Shi Huang, was impressed by Han Fei's writings and wished to meet him. However, Li Si, who had become chief minister of Jin, felt threatened by Han Fei's intellectual prowess. Li Si convinced the Jin king that Han Fei should not be sent back to Han, as his intelligence would pose a serious threat to Jin. At the same time, he argued Han Fei should not be employed in Jin, as his loyalty would always be to his home state. So Li Si recommended imprisoning Han Fei on charges of duplicity. Although Han Fei attempted to defend himself through his writings, he was ultimately forced to commit suicide by drinking poison provided by Li Si. The Jin king later regretted Han Fei's death, but it was too late. Ironically, Li Si himself met a gruesome end in 208 BCE after becoming embroiled in a power struggle following the death of Jin Shi Huang. While legalism as an independent school of thought declined after the fall of the Jin dynasty, its emphasis on rule of law remained influential in Chinese governance. The subsequent synthesis of legalist and Confucian principles created a unique model of governance that shaped Chinese political thought for centuries to come. We will now examine legalist philosophy as presented by Han Fei. Goal of governance. Legalists fundamentally reject Confucian goals of governance, particularly the emphasis on moral education and the observance of tradition. Confucius believed that a ruler's virtue and the moral cultivation of the people were central to effective governance. Legalists, however, argue that morality is irrelevant and ineffective in politics. Regarding tradition and rituals, legalists maintain that the traditional models are no longer suitable for governance. They reject the Confucian belief that people were good in the past because virtuous kings ruled them. Instead, legalists assert that whether people are good or bad depends not on inherent moral nature but on circumstances, particularly economic conditions. For example, during a famine, people may refuse to share food even with their relatives, while in times of abundance, they may host feasts for casual visitors. This behavior, according to legalists, does not reflect a change in character, but simply a response to changing circumstances. Therefore, Confucius was mistaken in thinking that people in ancient times were better because their kings ruled with virtue. In reality, people valued goods less when they were abundant and became aggressive and greedy when resources were scarce. Legalists also reject the relevance of moral education for both the ruler and the people. They argue that a ruler should not attempt to make people good, nor should he waste energy trying to win them over. Legalists believe that people do not know what is in their best interests, and their minds are as undependable as those of infants. Contrary to Confucian thought, which sees the ruler as a moral exemplar for the people, legalists argue that the ruler should govern from behind the scenes, unseen and unburdened by the need to display virtue. The goal of governance, according to legalists, is to achieve practical results focused on increasing the state's wealth and power, both externally through military strength and internally through effective control of the population. Legalists argue that effective governance requires recognizing the self-interest and unpredictability of human behavior. While the promotion of virtue is seen as ineffective, preventing people from doing evil through strict laws and severe punishments is considered effective. Thus, good governance aims to create a system that severely punishes any unwanted actions. Legalism emphasizes the primacy of the state above all else, expecting individuals to prioritize their duty to the nation over personal relationships or moral considerations. For example, a soldier who defects from battle because he believes that dying would prevent him from serving his father is acting on personal or familial loyalty, a justification that might be acceptable under Confucianism. However, legalists view this as an incorrect decision, detrimental to the state's interests. Han Fei's statement, "A filial son to his father can be a traitorous subject to his ruler," underscores the legalist belief that duty to the state and ruler supersedes all other obligations. In addition to advocating for the supremacy of the state, legalists argue for the absolute power of the ruler, in stark contrast to Confucius, who believed that a ruler's legitimacy was conditional on virtue and moral qualities. To legalists, power itself grants a ruler the authority to command and the right to rule. In other words, the ruler's authority comes not from being a moral exemplar, but from possessing the power to control others and enforce obedience. Right to rule versus right to be obeyed. In absolute monarchy, according to legalists, what is good and bad is defined by whatever serves the ruler's interests. However, legalists also acknowledge that the interests of rulers are not the same as those of their subordinates, a natural view due to the self-interest of all individuals. Han Fei said, "Superior and inferior wage 100 battles a day," meaning the ruler and the ruled are constantly at odds. Given this constant strife, legalists question how to establish a stable nation. Legalists believe that power alone isn't enough to create a stable, lasting kingdom. Power is like brute force, like holding a gun. You can force people to do what you want, but there's always a risk that someone stronger, with a bigger gun, will come along and overthrow you. Power can give someone the right to rule and issue commands, but it doesn't guarantee the right to be obeyed. A ruler who governs based on personal desires or by issuing arbitrary decrees is like a highwayman, and acting like a highway robber, driven by personal predilections, biases, and whims, undermines the stability of the state. For a lasting kingdom, legalists argue that power needs to be depersonalized and separated from the ruler himself. That is, the ruler's authority should be institutionalized and become laws. By establishing the ruler as the source of law, legalism centralizes control, which legalists view as essential for preventing the decentralization that had led to the fall of previous dynasties. This centralization allowed for consistent enforcement and minimized the potential for local corruption or deviation from state policies. Laws in legalism not only centralize power but also improve compliance. Legalists maintained that laws must be applied uniformly and without bias, treating everyone equally regardless of their status. According to legalists, even the king should obey the law, despite the fact that he is the source of the law and has the power to abrogate the laws. They assert that obeying the law is in the ruler's interests. One reason for this is that by adhering to the laws, rulers can avoid their own follies. More importantly, this consistent application creates a fair and predictable legal system, which in turn can win public support and encourage voluntary compliance. In other words, when laws are enforced fairly and consistently, people are more likely to follow them willingly, reducing the need for harsh punishments. Legalist philosophy takes an interesting turn when it focuses on the compliance of the law. In terms of making people obey the law, the reward and punishment system is considered the lowest form. This type of authority has the right to rule, but not the right to be obeyed. The highest form of compliance occurs when people feel they have a duty to obey the law. Confucians believed that when people internalized morality, virtuous rulers earned the right to be obeyed, achieving compliance without coercion. Legalists, however, object to this idea. They maintain that the concept of a virtuous ruler leading to the highest compliance is unrealistic idealism. Instead, legalists argue that laws must be based on realism, taking into account people's actual behavior and motivations. To illustrate this point, Han Fei offers this story. Once, a king asked a famous artist what subject was the hardest to draw and what was the easiest. The artist replied that dogs and horses were the hardest to draw because people knew what they should look like. Devils and demons were easy to draw because no one could see them. This analogy is profound in its implications for governance. Just as the artist must adhere to established norms to accurately capture the essence of familiar subjects, so should laws be crafted to align personal incentives with state goals. To legalists, drawing monsters is akin to the Confucian way. When people are inherently self-interested and prone to do evil, achieving legitimacy by making people good is a chimera. Drawing dogs, on the other hand, is what legalists aim to do. Just as the artist struggles with familiar subjects due to the clear expectations and standards people have, so do legalists struggle to make laws that can harness individual self-interest toward the benefit of the state. This approach acknowledges the reality of human nature and seeks to work with it rather than against it. By crafting laws that align with people's natural inclinations and self-interest, they believe it's possible to achieve a higher form of compliance, one where people follow the law not just out of fear of punishment, but because it aligns with their own interests. In terms of crafting the ideal legalist laws, legalists found inspiration in Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching. Han Fei interpreted the book as a political text, seeing the Tao as a natural law that everyone and everything was compelled to follow. He believed that the ideal laws were those of least resistance, paralleling the Taoist concept of Wu Wei. Han Fei posited that an ideal ruler should create laws that, like an inevitable force of nature, the people could not resist. This interpretation of Taoist principles led legalists to argue for a form of governance that, while appearing heavy-handed, actually sought to achieve control with the least resistance. Critique of legalism. Legalism, adopted as the state ideology by the Jin dynasty, emphasized strict laws and harsh punishments based on the belief that people, driven by self-interest, would cause chaos and disorder without strong control. This approach proved unsustainable, as evidenced by the short-lived Jin dynasty. The harsh legalist policies led to widespread dissatisfaction and rebellion, ultimately resulting in the dynasty's rapid collapse. While it's easy to criticize legalism on moral grounds, particularly from a Confucian perspective, there are also internal inconsistencies within the philosophy itself that may have contributed to its downfall. Two significant incoherences can be identified. The first inconsistency is characterized by the entrapped sovereign paradox. On one hand, legalism advocates for the ruler to have absolute power, similar to Hobbes' concept of the Leviathan. However, unlike Hobbes, who justifies rule by sovereign will, legalists argue for rule by law, recognizing the potential incapacity of rulers. This creates a paradoxical situation where the supposedly omnipotent ruler becomes entrapped by the very system designed to maintain stability. The ruler's power is limited by the need for the legal and bureaucratic system to operate independently, resulting in a fundamental contradiction within legalism. It seeks to grant the ruler complete control while simultaneously requiring the ruler to refrain from direct involvement to ensure the state functions smoothly. Another major inconsistency in legalism comes from the paradox of enforcing harsh laws that are supposed to benefit the rulers. Legalism advocates for strict and punitive laws to maintain control and order, primarily serving the interests of the ruling class. However, when legalists examined how people actually follow laws, they discovered that compliance is most effective when the laws align with the self-interests of the subjects. This creates a paradox. Instead of instilling fear and obedience through severe punishments, the system unintentionally creates a situation where the interests of both the rulers and the subjects coincide. This contradiction highlights the tension between legalism's focus on strict control and the realities of governance. That is, while legalism seeks to control society through fear and harsh laws, it may find that the most effective governance comes from laws that people are willing to follow, challenging the core idea of legalism itself. These inconsistencies between absolute power and rule of law, as well as the shifting nature of laws from serving the ruler's interests to aligning with the subject's interests, underscore the difficulty in reconciling legalism's core principles. Ultimately, these contradictions undermine its viability as a comprehensive and sustainable political philosophy.